topic we saw. So we were discussing electromagnetic waves, right? So in electromagnetic waves, the last topic I remember is explaining about the speed of an electromagnetic wave. Right? The stubnet. Yes. So we saw this topic, right? The speed of an electromagnetic wave, which is given by the expression 1 by mu naught into epsilon naught. So we can derive it from C is equal to E by B also. This is the last topic we saw. Then write down the next topic, that is energy in an electromagnetic wave. So write down, this is the topic, energy in electromagnetic wave. So as we know that electromagnetic wave consists of electric field and magnetic field, right? We know that it contains electric field and magnetic field. A part of the energy is carried by electric field and partly it is carried by magnetic field. I hope it is clear, right? So I hope you guys are able to understand. So this is what happens in an electromagnetic wave. So mathematically, what is going to happen? Mathematically, the total energy per unit volume, what is it called as? The total energy stored per unit volume. There is a technical name for it.
Energy density.
Energy density.
Yes. So here we are going to speak about energy density. So when you talk about the total energy density of an electromagnetic wave, then energy stored per unit volume by electric field plus energy stored per unit volume by magnetic field. That is the total energy that is stored in the electromagnetic field, right? So what is the energy stored? What is the energy stored per unit volume by electric field? Let's try to derive this. So let's try to derive this. Tell me guys, what is the energy stored per unit volume or energy density of electric field? It is half epsilon naught E square. Where did we see this? Half epsilon naught E
Chapter.
second chapter, when we discussed about the energy stored in a capacitor. Energy stored in a capacitor in the form of electromagnetic, sorry, it's stored in the form of electric field, right? So half epsilon naught E square. Similarly, what is the energy density of magnetic field? Half
B divided by mu naught.
B square divided by mu naught. See, E should be replaced with B. Epsilon naught should be replaced with 1 by mu naught. We know that they are inversely proportional, right? That is how the relations are derived. So 1 by 2 into B square divided by mu naught. Then, what is the relation between C, E and B according to our previous class discussion? So C is equal to E divided by B, right? So we can write B is equal to E divided by C. Let me call this as equation number 1, this as equation number 2. Let's call this as equation number 3. Similarly, what is the relation between C and mu naught epsilon naught? C is equal to 1 divided by root of mu naught into epsilon naught. Right? So this can be written as, from this we can conclude, mu naught is equal to 1 by epsilon naught C square. Can we write it like this? So 4. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to replace B with electric field, mu naught with permittivity. So when you use 3 and 4 in second equation, what do you get? When you use 3 and 4 in second equation, what do you get? You will get 1 by 2 B square divided by mu naught is equal to 1 by 2 is common. So B square is E square divided by C square. The whole divided by mu naught. Mu naught is 1 by C square into epsilon naught. So this and this will get cancelled. It will become half epsilon naught E square. If I call this as 5, then what is going to be the total energy stored in the electromagnetic wave? So total energy will be half epsilon naught E square. We know that it is half B square by mu naught. But B square by mu naught can be replaced with epsilon naught E square. So what will be the answer? This will be the answer. So this is the total energy that is stored in the electromagnetic wave. Rather, I can say this is the total energy per unit volume that is stored in the electromagnetic wave. Right or wrong? So make a note of it.
Sir, can you scroll? Sir?
This one?
Yes, sir.
Right.
How does the second equation come, sir?
This one, no?
Yes, sir.
This is under magnetic field. This derivation is not there for you guys. I'll show you.
Okay.
You write it down and I'll show you where it is.
Sir, can you show me the last equation?
Yeah. So it is from here. The magnetic energy per unit volume is given by this expression. 1 by 2 into B square divided by mu naught.
Okay, sir.
Okay, you can go through this derivation. It's not a derivation actually, it's a problem. Okay, you can go through this. If you have a doubt, let me know.
Yes, sir.
So I'll tell you this also. It's in chapter 6, page number 224 in your NCERT. You can make a note of it. So if you ask me how I wrote it directly, how to remember is, I told you there is a relevance between electric field and magnetic field, right? So what you do? 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, we will generally replace it with mu naught by 4 pi in magnetism. So wherever you see 1 by epsilon naught, it is replaced with mu naught. So that is why here epsilon naught is replaced with 1 by mu naught and electric field was replaced with magnetic field. That's so you can remember. Okay. So there are two last subtopics that are left out, which I'm going to teach, and I'll tell you what you need to do for self-study. So the next one is properties of electromagnetic waves. So this is a very, very important point, which is going to be the lead for our next chapter. That is the second volume's first chapter, ray optics. So if you calculate the velocity of electromagnetic wave in space or vacuum, it is a fundamental constant. And what is the value of it? It is 3 into 10 power 8 meter per second. That's what we derived. C is equal to 1 by mu naught into epsilon naught. So visible light is also a form of electromagnetic wave. Similarly, there is no material medium required for the propagation of electromagnetic wave. So what kind of waves are they? They are non-mechanical waves. But it doesn't mean they cannot propagate through a material medium. They can propagate through a material medium, but in general, they are trying to say medium is actually not required for the propagation of electromagnetic waves. Similarly, the last point you need to make a note of is electromagnetic waves carry energy and momentum. So they carry energy. Energy per unit volume is given as epsilon naught E square, and they carry momentum also. How it is going to happen, we'll see it in the next topic. Is it clear till this step? These are the properties of electromagnetic waves. So if you observe, till here, let me recollect all the topics. So if you observe, the first part that we have seen in this chapter is sources of electromagnetic waves. See, before this, there is a topic called as displacement current, but that is removed from your syllabus, deleted for this year. And it is an independent topic only, so I didn't explain it. So first thing is displacement current. Then we discussed about the sources of electromagnetic waves. So what is the source of an electromagnetic wave? It is an oscillating charged particle. We discussed the previous class. That is, you have an accelerating charged particle, then it is going to generate the electromagnetic wave. Then we saw what is the nature of electromagnetic wave. It has transverse nature, transverse waves. So transverse waves means we know. So then we saw the equation of electric and magnetic field, which are present in the electromagnetic wave. E naught sine kx minus omega t and B naught sine kx minus omega t. Right. So we saw all these things. Then last class, I explained you how to derive the expression for speed of electromagnetic wave. This class, we started with energy in electromagnetic wave. Then we saw the properties of electromagnetic wave. The last topic that we need to understand is electromagnetic waves exert pressure. How do they do? That is the question. Okay. So, as they carry energy, right? So they are going to carry energy that we have proved. As they carry energy and momentum, they exert pressure, and the pressure exerted by the electromagnetic wave is known as the radiation pressure. Please make a note of it. So this might be a 1 mark question. They'll ask you, what do you mean by radiation pressure? It is nothing but the pressure exerted by the electromagnetic wave, since it carries energy and momentum. Okay. So the example for this is given. So sunlight is one such example. Sunlight, which comes from sun, is a form of visible light rays. So visible light rays are one form of electromagnetic waves, so which are also a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So generally what happens, if we keep our palm in sun for some time, palm becomes warm and starts sweating. So why is this happening? It is because the sunlight is getting transferred in the form of electromagnetic waves, and electromagnetic waves carry energy, and it is exerting what pressure on us? It is exerting a radiation pressure on us. Okay. So it's the example is given. Suppose the total energy transferred to the hand is E, then what will be the momentum? Momentum is equal to E divided by C, where C is very large quantity and momentum is very less. Hence, the pressure experienced is also very less. Okay. So momentum is given as E divided by C. Okay, where E is the energy that is getting the energy carried by the electromagnetic wave, and C stands for the speed of the light. E divided by C is going to speak about the momentum. Since the momentum is very less, the pressure experienced is also very less. That's why we don't feel pressure when the sunlight is falling on us. See, I can explain why momentum is actually important for pressure. So last year you would have learned kinetic theory of gases, right? Yes or no? So in kinetic theory of gases, the molecules of the gas will exert a pressure on the container. Yes or no? So when we talk about pressure, how is the pressure due to the gas actually falling on the container? Can someone tell me how is the pressure being exerted by the gas molecules on the walls of the container?
Due to collision.
Outwards on the surface.
That's the reason. It's because of the collision. So what kind of collision is actually assumed?
Oblique collisions.
Oblique is okay. In oblique also you can talk about inelastic or elastic.
Elastic.
It's assumed to have a perfectly elastic collision. So whenever you talk about a collision, what is concept?
Momentum is concept.
So the linear momentum is concept. That is why if you see here also the particles are able to exhibit momentum. That is the reason why momentum is actually related to pressure. It is something similar to this one you can visualize. Okay. So I'm just giving you the connection, and this is how you can think. So with this, my teaching part is over. There is only one particular topic I ask you people to read on your own. That is nothing but this electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So you would have seen this, right, in your chemistry. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you would have seen this, right? In this chapter, what you're supposed to do is all the electromagnetic waves that are there in the spectrum are described separately. It's a complete theory concept. So you need to read how each electromagnetic wave is getting generated and the order of it, and remember those frequencies. So when you read these descriptions itself, you can make a note of it and write it down. I'll suggest you to prepare a tabular column and have all the details in it. We know one thing, right? Electromagnetic waves are generally produced only because of the accelerated charge particles. If you read everything, it will be a common point. If you talk about a radio waves are produced by whom? Accelerated motion of charges in conducting wires. So if this is happening, then radio waves will get generated. So they will ask, what is the form of electromagnetic wave which will get generated when an accelerated charge particle is moving in a conducting wire? Your answer should be radio waves. Or if they want to complicate the question, they will ask you, what is the frequency range or the bandwidth of an electromagnetic wave which is getting generated due to the accelerated motion of charged particles in conducting wire? Then you need to have this in your mind. It is between 88 megahertz to 108 megahertz. Okay, they can ask anything. So it will definitely be from this paragraph. Are you guys able to understand?
Yes, sir.
Or sometimes, so this point will be common: accelerated motion of charged particles in conducting waves. You should know it is radio wave. With respect to radio wave, they can ask anything. They can directly ask the name if the question has to be simple, or they can ask you bandwidth, or they can ask a question like this: what are the uses of electromagnetic waves which are getting generated due to accelerated motion of charges in conducting wires? Then you have to look at this. These are mainly used for communication purpose. It has a lot of application in chapter 15. Chapter 15 is communication system. That is also not there in your syllabus. So, but we know that cellular phones use radio waves to transmit voice communication in UHF band. Okay, so these things you need to read. Similarly, read about microwaves. You need to read about each. Then have this table in your mind, and questions are based only on that. So these 3 pages alone, I'm giving it as self-study. Throughout your 12th standard, this is the only point I give as self-study. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So this is all about electromagnetic waves chapter. As I told you, it's a very small chapter, but this has a connectivity to the next chapter. I'll tell you where the connectivity starts from. So if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, so before that, what is the name of next chapter? That is the 9th chapter. It is
Ray optics.
Ray optics.
ray of, yeah, it is ray optics. So what do we actually deal with in ray optics? What do we deal in ray optics? You would have learned this in your 10th standard. There was a chapter named light. No? So when you speak about light, what light are we speaking there?
Visible light.
We are speaking about visible light. If you look at this, you can see the visible light to be one of the members of the electromagnetic spectrum. So our concentration is going to be only on visible light starting from next chapter. That is why ray optics need a little bit basic idea about electromagnetic waves. I hope you guys are able to understand. So
Yes.
shall I move on to the next chapter then? Yeah.
Sir, so we don't have displacement current from this chapter, right?
No, displacement current is deleted.
Okay.
But one point you need to have in your mind is the name of the scientist. I'll be using this name. So Maxwell was the person who predicted the existence of electromagnetic waves. If you look at your second volume, in second volume, everywhere we speak mainly about radiations. The first 2 chapters of second volume, that is ray optics, and there is a topic called wave optics. These 2 mainly speak about visible light. Okay, then there is a third chapter, which is the third chapter of second volume, which we call it as dual nature of matter and radiation. So in this, we will try to compare the 2 natures that light will possess, that is the radiation will possess. At that time, you need to have this name in your mind, have this name Maxwell in your mind. So he was a scientist who found the existence of electromagnetic waves. So he was the one who predicted electromagnetic waves, and displacement current mainly speaks about Maxwell-Ampere equation. Okay. Since it's an independent topic, I'm leaving it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sir, can you share that PDF, sir? EM
Which
waves.
this one? This one. This is the one which I'm sharing.
No, sir,
Or
not
this
this
one.
So
one.
for this lesson, can you
The
share
one-
the notes, sir?
The notes.
Yeah,
the,
this
the
one,
one
sir.
the handwritten one, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do this. Yeah, I'll share it. Remind me before the end of the class. I'll do it immediately.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So shall we move on to the next chapter?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just give me 2 minutes time. Okay, I'll take some screenshots and come. I prepared some notes. I'll be back. Just 2 minutes.
Sir, you are not audible, sir.
Now am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we will be starting with this 9th chapter. The chapter 9 is known as ray optics, or it is also known as geometric optics.
Sir, Arumukesh is
So-
waiting.
I've accepted.
Okay.
Yes, inside. Okay, it is ray optics or geometric optics. So before we get into the main context of the chapter, we need to understand what optics means. So what does optics actually mean? Optics is one of the branches of physics which deals with the behavior of light and other electromagnetic waves. Okay. The question is, we'll see why we call it as ray optics and also it as geometric optics also. Now the question is again, we are saying behavior of light. What does light mean? We saw just now, right? So what does light mean? Light is an electromagnetic wave or radiation whose wavelength is varying from the range of 4,000 angstrom to 7,000 angstrom. Okay, and what light is this? This light we are trying to speak about is the visible light. Right? Information you already know, right? It is between 4,000 angstrom to 7,000 angstrom, or it is between 200 nanometer. You can write it like this also. So, one important point to be noted here is, as I told you, the chapter 9 is called as ray optics and chapter 10 is called as wave optics. Chapter 10 is called as wave optics. So what we are going to do in this two chapters, in the present, that is in ray optics, and the next chapter, that is wave optics, we'll be studying the behavior of beam of light, okay, which encounters simple optical devices like what? Mirrors, lenses, and aperture. Okay. Next, the next important point to be kept in mind is under many circumstances, the wavelength of light is negligible compared to the dimensions of devices like mirrors, lenses. In such circumstances, light can be treated as ray governed by simple geometric rules. Let me explain what this point is. See, what are we saying light is? Light is an electromagnetic wave. Associated with it. So there are number of vibrations that are going to take place, right? So it has a concept called as frequency associated with it. So if you observe the wavelength of light, it is between 4,000 to 7,000 angstrom, then what will happen to its frequency? Will it be less or more?
More.
So the frequency of light is going to be very high, right? Increasing the
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Yes, sir.
okay. All right. So is it better now?
Yes, sir, but we couldn't hear what you said before.
From where? From which point was it not audible?
From the ray points and like such circumstances.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, See, we know that light is an electromagnetic wave, right? So electromagnetic wave will have frequency associated with it. Every wave has a frequency, right? So when the frequency is going to be more, the wavelength is going to be less. Means the vibrations will be in such a way that they appear to be so close to each other. This is how the wave will actually travel. The wave will actually travel. So when the wave is traveling in this way, what can we assume? If you observe, it is as if the particle is traveling in a straight line path. Right? So in such circumstances, what we can do is, light can be treated as a ray, and that light can be dealt using the geometric concepts. So that is the reason why this chapter is also called as geometric optics, is because we use more of similarities of triangles in this chapter to prove certain things. Okay. So this is just the outline. The next point to be understood is, so the part of physics which deals with such phenomena is termed as ray optics or geometric optics. Okay. So this is what we have seen. I'll just give you an introduction of what is wave optics also. So what happens in wave optics is, if the wavelength is not negligible compared to the dimensions of the device with which the light is trying to interact. So observe, I'll write it down. So this is a very, very important point, guys. Listen to it carefully. So what happens in ray optics is, we are dealing with light. I hope there is no doubt in that. So in this case, what will happen is, light will interact with objects like mirrors and lens. Okay, it will deal with mirror and lens. Compared to the size of mirror and lens, wavelength of light is very small. So when it is very small, it can be treated as a ray. Okay. Whereas what happens in the chapter wave optics is, the other name for wave optics is physical optics.
Sorry, your voice is continuously breaking, sir.
I'm close to Wi-Fi. Huh? Is it still breaking?
No, sir, it was clear for me.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm trying to talk about wave optics. The other name for wave optics is physical optics. This is also not given in textbook. We call it as wave optics only. Again, here also optics means we are going to deal with light only. But the question is, when will you treat light like a ray, and when will you know that you need to treat light like a wave? That is what we need to understand. Okay. So you will treat light like a wave under the scenario when light is interacting with objects whose size is very, very small compared to the wavelength of light incident on it. Okay. So if the light is interacting with objects whose size is very, very small compared to the wavelength of itself, then that in that particular context, we treat light like a wave. So what we deal in the next chapter is, you will be dealing with very small openings like this. So light will be traveling through this very small opening. You're able to see, if I zoom, it will be big or it will be very small. So these openings are generally called as slits. Okay. So just have this point in your mind. Don't worry too much about it. Just have this point. So in this chapter, we are going to deal it as ray optics. Okay. The first phenomenon that is exhibited by light. So what do you mean by phenomenon? Phenomenon is a thing that you can see with your own eyes, right? So the first phenomenon that light can exhibit is reflection of light, right? So you know what is reflection of light, right? It is a phenomenon in which light ray is sent back into the same medium from which it is coming, on interaction with the boundary is called reflection. So generally the boundary will be what? It will be smooth and shining surface. This is what you would have learned in your lower grades. So if the light is bouncing back when it strikes a shiny and a smooth surface, then that phenomenon of light is what is called as reflection of light. Okay. Then you would have learned the laws of reflection also. So what are the laws of reflection? So before, can someone tell me what are the laws of reflection? Can we make it really fast because this reflection is deleted from your question? But I have to explain it for you to understand. Okay, angle of incidence is equal to angle of reflection. Okay, then the incident ray, reflected ray.
Incident ray, reflected ray, and the point of normal lie on the same plane.
Yes. Yes, that's right. So the incident ray, reflected ray, and the normal all will lie on the same plane. So you know what is angle of incidence, right? So angle of incidence is represented with angle I. It is the angle between the incident ray and the normal. What do you mean by normal?
The perpendicular line to the plane.
Yes, normal means perpendicular. Perpendicular at the point of incidence. Normal at the point of incidence. So if you take a ray to fall on a mirror like this incident ray, there is a point of incidence. If I take this as the normal, then this angle is called as angle of incidence. If it is getting reflected, this is called as the angle of reflection. So I will be equal to R, and incident ray, reflected ray, and the normal all will lie in the same plane. Right? So these are the laws of reflection. Then we know how to draw the ray diagrams, right? So how to draw normal for, see, these are all the notes prepared by me. I wrote it. I've written all the basics. You can go through it later. I've just written on how to draw normal for any reflecting surface. If it is a plane reflecting surface, how will you draw the normal for it? So plane means it's a straight reflecting surface. So how to draw the normal, guys? So when you take a plane surface, when the light is incident on it, so in this chapter, the very first point you need to have in your mind is for any ray diagram, you should be good with drawing the normal. Okay. When it is hitting the surface, at the point of incidence, you need to draw a perpendicular. The question is, perpendicular for whom?
Perpendicular with respect to the plane.
With respect to the surface on which it is incident. So generally the normal should always be represented using a dotted line. Okay. Then you can use the laws of reflection to prove that this angle, to show that angle I and angle R are the same. Then you can do and solve the problems. Similarly, when you draw for a spherical surface, this is the point I've seen where people struggle. So when you draw the normal for a spherical surface, what are we supposed to do? So when you draw for a spherical surface, let's say there is a ray which is incident at this point. Okay. So always the first thing we need to do is define the point of incidence. So point of incidence is nothing but the point where the incident ray and the surface are meeting. I hope it is clear.
Yes, sir.
So if I take this thing, since I'm calling it as a spherical mirror, the spherical mirror will have a center here. So what do you mean by normal to a sphere? So what do you mean by normal to a sphere?
Perpendicular to the tangent.
Yes, perpendicular to the tangent at which point?
Point of incidence.
Point of
Yes,
incidence.
that's right. So means you should virtually imagine that there is a tangent drawn at this point, and if you draw a perpendicular here, then we know that normal to a surface like circle or sphere will always pass through what?
Center.
Yes, will always pass through the center. So join the center and this point. So to put it in simple terms, first you need to define the point of incidence, join the point of incidence and the center of the circle or the sphere. That will give you the normal. Then you can define the angle of incidence and angle of reflection. So I've drawn everything here. You can see it later. Next. The next point is reflection from a plane surface. Okay. So reflection from a plane surface. You have a plane mirror and there is a point object that is kept. So what I've done is I've drawn two diagrams. One is with a point object and the second is called as an extended object. So what do you mean by point object? So you call an object as a point object if its size is ignorable. If its size can be ignored, we call it as a point object. If its size cannot be ignored, we call it as an extended object. Most of the derivations in this chapter are derived using only extended objects, at least with respect to your NCERT. But if you want to understand the context, you can do it with point object also. Maybe you can do it for your other exams. Don't do it here. Okay. So what do you mean? What exactly happens in the case of a plane mirror? So if you have to draw a ray diagram for it, if you have to draw the ray diagram for a plane mirror, let's say we kept a point object here. So how many rays are required for us to complete the ray diagram? Minimum number of rays that are required. Two. Right. So I take one ray to be like this. So there is the incident ray because it is traveling towards the mirror. So at the point of incidence, what will happen? We need to first draw the normal. Once you draw the normal, the ray will get reflected symmetric with respect to the normal. Means if this angle is theta, this angle will also be theta. That is what I'm trying to say. Similarly, if you take another ray here, this is the point of incidence. If you draw a normal, it will get reflected like this. If this is alpha, there is also alpha. Right? So in this case, will these two reflected rays be able to meet? Will they meet on a real time at any point?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No.
So they can't. So they get diverged, right? But it will be as if these rays are meeting here virtually. Right? If this is the object, there's going to be the image. See, the diagram is not to the scale, so it will be slightly difficult only. So what is the nature of the image formed by the plane mirror?
Laterally inverted.
Laterally inverted. Okay. So I've drawn with a point object. No? So first is it is virtual.
Virtual.
Is it going to be enlarged or of the same size?
Same size.
Same size.
It will be of the same size. So magnification will be 1. Right. And we know it is going to be laterally inverted also. So when you do the same thing with respect to an extended object. So when you do the same thing with respect to an extended object, what happens? How to complete the ray diagram? So you can take one ray to hit here. If this is the point of incidence, then by default, the line which is given is a normal. So if you take this as theta, this will also be theta. So when the ray is incident, like this. Now tell me what is the angle of incidence?
0.
0.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Most common mistake that is done is people will say it is 90. No. Because the angle of incidence in this case, in the case of the second ray is 0 because it is directly traveling along the normal and the ray will get reflected in the same way. So this is one of the reflected rays, this is one of the reflected rays. So they also can't meet. So when you try to extend it backwards, you will get a virtual image. Right? So this is a known fact. If this is AB, then this is A dash, B dash, such that AB is equal to A dash, B dash. Right? So you're able to understand? This part and all you need not copy. Just let me know if you're able to understand.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is the thing. Magnification is equal to 1. So here again magnification. So how do you define magnification? It is defined as the ratio of size of the image to the size of object. That is, if you are able to define this as hi, that is the height of the object to height of the height of image, and this as height of object, then m will be equal to hi divided by h naught. This is the basic definition of magnification. Okay, so this magnification is also called as linear magnification, because there are other such magnification that will exist, aerial magnification and all those things exist. Okay, so here we are calling it as linear magnification. So obviously it is a dimensionless quantity because you're taking the ratio of the same physical quantity. So this is all about the basic of reflection, and we saw reflection with respect to a plane mirror. Okay, so the concept which we need to understand is what exactly happens with respect to spherical mirrors. So what do you mean by spherical mirror in the first place? So mirrors which are a part of the spherical surface are termed as spherical mirrors. Okay, here one important approximation that we do is the size of the spherical mirror will be small. So if you take, let's say, this as a sphere, then if you cut a part, you are able to cut it into two parts, right? So you will always try to take this portion. So if that portion is taken and it is silvered on one of the sides, then based on the direction in which it is silvered, the mirrors are basically classified into two types. What are they?
Convex, concave.
Concave and convex.
So out of these two, which one is concave, which one is convex?
First one is concave, second one is concave.
It is concave and this is convex. That's right. So you have a concave mirror and a convex mirror. The other name for concave mirror is converging mirror. The other name for convex mirror is diverging mirror. Why is it so?
Because the mirror converges.
The rays will be converging in the concave.
The ray.
Converge means what? Converge means what? What is the simple name of converging? I don't want this.
They all meet at one point.
They come close to it. They come close to each other. So if something is coming close to each other, we call it as getting converged. They're going away from each other, we call it as diverged. That's right. They meet at a point. That's right. Right. So what are all the terms that are related to spherical mirrors? That also we need to understand. So what are the terms and definitions that are related to spherical mirror? First thing is center of curvature. So what do you mean by center of curvature? So center of curvature is the center of the sphere from which this mirror is actually taken out. The center of the sphere of which the mirror is a part of is called as the center of curvature. Okay. So one important point to be noted is center of curvature for a concave mirror. So if you observe, for a concave mirror, where is the center of curvature? It's on the reflecting side, whereas for a convex mirror, it is on the silvered side. So this is the center of curvature. Okay. So these are all points you need to have in mind for sign convention concept. Next, what do you mean by pole? So what exactly is pole? Pole is called as the center point of the spherical surface. Means if this is the spherical part, okay, if you take a point P here in such a way that the distance from here, that is the yellow distance, is equal to, is equal to green distance, then we call it as the pole of the mirror. Okay, that is what is meant by center of the mirror surface. Then what is principal axis?
The line drawn perpendicular to pole.
Line drawn perpendicular to the pole. Okay. So if you draw it perpendicular to the pole, how will it pass? Through which point will it pass?
Pole
Center of curvature.
and the C.
It pass through the center of curvature. That's right. So if you're able to draw an imaginary line that is joining the pole and the center of curvature, then that imaginary line is what is called as the principal axis. Okay. Next one is aperture. What do you mean by aperture? So aperture means this distance. So this distance is called as the aperture. You can ask me, why is aperture important? So aperture will decide what is the intensity of the light that is getting reflected, or intensity of the light that is falling on the surface. Now tell me one thing. See, okay, I've given you two spherical mirrors, concave mirrors in this way. Tell me which one has a greater aperture.
Second.
So obviously the second one has greater aperture. But what is the advantage of the second aperture is
It can reflect more.
if I introduce, let's say 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9, 10. I'm introducing 10 rays. Out of the 10 rays, all the 10 rays will go and fall on the second surface. But how many rays are falling on the first surface? 1, 2, 3, 4, only 4. So which one can produce a better image? Better image in the sense, a brighter image.
Second.
Second one.
So this is one of the reasons why this concept of aperture is very important. If you take photos and all, right, you can see that there is a concept called as adjustment of aperture. If you have more amount of lighting entering your camera lens, then the aperture, you are trying to increase the aperture because you're allowing more light to enter, then your picture will be bright. That is the reason why this concept is very important. Okay. Next is radius of curvature. What do you mean by radius of curvature? It is the, to put it in simple terms, it is the distance between the pole and the center of curvature, right? The distance between the pole and the center of curvature is called as the radius of curvature. Or you can put it like this also. The radius of the sphere of which the mirror is a part of is also the radius of curvature. Right? I hope these points you already know. The next is principal focus. This is a very, very important point. So what do you mean by this focal point? Anybody? So what do you mean by
between C and P?
No, that's not the point between C and P means you can take it anywhere. No, that's not the thing.
Midpoint.
It should.
Midpoint.
It is not. How did you know it is midpoint? We never proved. Maybe you would have learned in your 10th standard. They would have told it's a midpoint, but there are certain conditions to be followed to prove it's a midpoint.
So a line parallel to the principal axis get reflected and
Ray.
passes.
Don't use line. Don't use the word line. Ray. Ray parallel. You're right. Proceed. Ray parallel to the principal axis.
Get reflected and pass through the point on the principal axis.
That's right. So if you take a ray which is coming from infinity, right? If you talk about a ray which is coming from infinity, or you can take a set of parallel rays. If a set of parallel rays are falling on a spherical mirror, then at the point of incidence, what are we supposed to do? Define the normal like this. We know that this angle is I, then the ray will also get reflected with the same angle I. Okay. So there's one point. But for us to locate the image, we need two rays, right? The other ray, what we can do is if you consider it along the principal axis, the ray will get reflected back along the principal axis. Then this point is called as the principal focus. Okay. So with respect to a concave mirror, where does the principal focus lie? It lies on the
Reflection, sir.
it lies on the same side as that of the reflecting surface. Whereas for a convex, what will happen? It will be on the side of the
Silvery, sir.
yeah. One minute. So when you're drawing ray diagrams, ensure that the incident ray is always on the left-hand side. So it is not right that you should not. I'm not saying it that you cannot take it on the right-hand side. You can do it, but conventionally that is what is followed. So when the ray is incident, then what will happen to this ray? So if this is the center of curvature, you have to it will be diverged. So it will get diverged in this way. You get diverged in such a way, if this angle is I, this angle will also be I. If you consider another ray like this, it will get reflected back in the same path. So when you try to join it, this will be the principal focus. Okay. So that's the point we have described. So observation shows that narrow beam of rays parallel or near to the principal axis are reflected back from a concave mirror, so that all the rays converge at a point F on the principal axis, termed as the principal focus. So concave mirror has a real focus, whereas a convex mirror will have a virtual focus. It will be on the other side. Tell me one thing, did you guys do an experiment in your 10th standard where you will have a stand, let's say a lens is given to you. You will keep a lens on a stand. You will have a small screen here. Then first thing is you will try to focus a tree which is at a far distance through this lens. Did you ever do this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You did it. Why are you actually doing it? You have this experiment this year also.
Sir, to adjust the focus point.
To find the focal length.
You're actually finding
the focal
you're not adjusting, you're actually finding the focal point. That is the approximate focal point. Because what do you mean by focus? When the object is at infinity, if the image, when the object is at infinity, the image due to that lens is actually formed at which point? A point called as the focus point. You're finding the focus so that you can apply it in the formula. 1 by v plus 1 by u is equal to 1 by f. If it is lens, it is 1 by v minus 1 by u is equal to 1 by f. Okay, so you will get one of the variables. That is why you're doing it. The same logic is applicable here also. Okay, so I've shown it here. There is a principal focus for a concave mirror and there is a principal focus for a convex mirror. The last concept is focal length. So what do you mean by focal length? It is obviously the distance between the pole and it will be the distance between the pole and the principal focus of the mirror. So it is generally represented by the symbol small f. Okay, this is the only distance which is actually represented. Okay. So don't don't get confused. Capital F stands for the point where the focus is present. Small f represents this distance. It is the focal length. Okay. So focal length is equal to r by 2, but there is a reason why it is r by 2. Okay, what you people told initially is right, but this r by 2 is applicable only for certain conditions followed. Okay. Then there are two types of rays that we are going to speak about. One is called as marginal rays and the second is called as paraxial rays. Okay. So what are marginal rays? Rays are the rays which are away from the principal axis are termed as marginal rays. For example, if you take this one, let's say there is a principal axis here. These rays which are far away from the principal axis are called as marginal rays. These can be called as marginal rays. And if the rays are very close to the principal axis, then those types of rays are called as paraxial rays. Okay, so those are called as paraxial rays. That is the rays which are close to the principal axis. Hence, they will make small angles with it. So they are nearly parallel to the principal axis and they are called as the paraxial rays. I hope these 2 points are clear. These 2 are important because the same thing will come for lens also. Okay, at that time you should understand. So marginal rays and paraxial rays. Okay.
Sir, will marginal rays hit the mirror or sir?
They will. See, with respect to a mirror only. If you take a mirror, if you take this thing, this is marginal, this is paraxial. Okay, we generally don't take marginal rays into consideration because there are certain errors they will generate. Those errors are called as aberrations. We call it as spherical aberrations or chromatic aberrations. So what will happen is, I told you one important point. No, when you take a ray which is parallel to the principal axis, after reflection, where should it meet?
Focus.
They will meet at which point? They will meet at the focus. No. So sometimes, while you see, you would have observed this. No. Sometimes when you try to rotate your camera, so if suppose you are using DSLR or something, have you observed blurred thing that is visible on the screen even before you click the pic? You would have seen, right? When you try to adjust, it will be blurred. Then you will try to autofocus or manual focus. You are trying to do, no. That time you will suddenly get a clear image of the object which is there on the other side. Have you ever experienced this?
Yes,
Sometimes
sir.
happens in your mobile also. So those are all what
Yes,
are called as aberrations. Those are called as aberrations because the light rays which are entering the camera lens are actually not getting or actually not meeting at the focus. That is why you're not able to see a clear image, you're seeing a blurred image. Those kind of errors are what are called as aberrations. That can be happening because the light entering might not fall on the focus or the mirror might be diverging, something of that sort. Okay, anything can happen inside.
Sir, it seems Hemant Kumar is waiting, sir.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, so in this chapter, discussions are related to spherical mirrors. So our discussion is restricted to spherical mirrors, where you consider only the paraxial rays and you consider mirrors of small aperture. Only if these 2 approximations are taken into consideration, then we can prove that F is equal to R divided by 2. Okay, that is when this is going to happen. So what are the 2 important points? One should be paraxial rays and the mirror should be of smaller aperture. Okay. See, ray diagram and all, I've prepared the notes, but I hope you people know how to draw it, right? There are 4 rules. What are the rules to be followed to draw a ray diagram? A ray through the center of curvature will get reflected back along the same path. You know this. Second, a ray parallel to the principal axis after reflection will meet at the
Principal
focus.
Focus.
The third one is a ray which is passing through the principal focus after reflection will go parallel to the principal axis. And the last point is a ray which is striking the pole will get reflected symmetrically back in the opposite direction. So if a ray is hitting the pole like this, if this angle is I, this angle will be R. So this is what is going to happen. Okay. So these are all the concepts related to spherical mirror. So I will just show you a small proof of why F is equal to R by 2 for you to just get clarity of how we do approximations in this chapter. Okay. So listen to me carefully. Write down the heading. Prove that F is equal to focal length is equal to half of the radius of curvature. Prove that F is equal to R by 2. This R by 2 should be applicable for both concave and convex mirror. Okay. Shall I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Now listen carefully. So we are considering a spherical mirror like this. Now we need to find the relation between focal length and the radius of curvature. For that, we need to consider a ray which is parallel to the principal axis. Okay. So I have considered a ray, one of the rays which is parallel to the principal axis. Now you people tell me, did I consider a marginal ray or a paraxial ray?
Marginal.
Marginal.
Right? It appears to be marginal, right? But it is actually a zoomed version of what we are seeing. What should be in your mind? This is actually a paraxial ray, but if I take it close, no, I cannot show you the angles properly. Because what did I say? The approximation that we do is we consider only paraxial ray. So no need to worry about marginal. Second, what about this length? The distance between A and B?
Aperture. Radius
And
of
what? That's right. Aperture is right. So should it have a greater aperture or a smaller aperture according to the derivations in the chapter? We are dealing with small aperture. So when the aperture is small, observe, when the aperture is small, what happens is you can say that this curvature is approximately a straight line. Though my diagram is looking curved, what should be in your mind? AB is approximately a straight line. So I'm writing it down. Listen. Approximately a straight line. Due to what reason? Since its aperture is very small. That's right. Okay. So when this is happening, so what will happen when the aperture is small is the angles that you're dealing with are small. Okay. Wherever you see that this aperture is small, it means that the angles related to that particular object is going to be small. So it is hitting here. So for you to complete the ray diagram, the first thing is define the normal reflected ray. This is capital F and this distance is small f, and this distance is, okay, this we are not concerned about. This distance is going to be R, and this is the pole. This is the center of curvature and this is the focus. I hope it is clear. So if you take this angle as theta, this angle will also be theta. Correct? So if this is theta, this is also theta. Now, how do we find the remaining angles? So what is this total angle, guys? The total angle is going to be 2 theta, right? So I will draw a separate diagram. See, it is like this. If this full thing is 2 theta, then how much will this angle be?
2 theta.
2 theta.
Alternate theta. Yes. So this is also going to be 2 theta. Correct? If this is 2 theta, I'm considering the triangle C. I'm considering the triangle CF and A. What is this angle? This is theta. Then how much is this angle? It is 2 theta. Then what will this angle be?
Theta.
Theta.
Exterior angle is equal to sum of opposite interior angles. We know this, right? So this is also going to be theta. Now what did I say? AB is approximately a straight line. If AB itself is a straight line, what can you say about AP? That will also be a straight line. So C, P, and A, if I take, this angle is theta. Similarly, if I take angle FP and A, this is 2 theta. So what is CP? R. What is FP? F. So tell me, what is tan theta from this triangle? Tan theta is equal to AP divided by R. From this triangle, tan 2 theta is what? It is AP divided by F, right? So when I told the aperture is small, the angles are small. When angles are small, sin theta can be approximated to tan theta can be approximated to theta, where theta is measured in terms of radian. So what we can do here is tan theta can be approximated to theta. So theta will be AP by R. Tan 2 theta can be approximated to 2 theta. So 2 theta will be equal to AP divided by F. So taking this theta and substituting here, 2 into AP divided by R is equal to AP divided by F. This and this will get cancelled. F will be equal to R by 2. Did you guys understand why it has actually come? If we didn't do this approximation, it is highly impossible for us to prove, because you would have taken tan 2 theta as what? 2 tan theta divided by 1 plus tan square theta and then proceeded. Sorry, 1 minus tan square theta and then you would have proceeded. If you do like that, you will get a complicated expression. You can never get this F is equal to R by 2. So what are the important approximation in this chapter? One is paraxial ray. Second is aperture is very small. When aperture is small, angles are small. Are you guys able to understand this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So again, this derivation is not from exam point of view, as they've removed reflection part, but it is for you to understand these two important concepts. Okay. You can just make a note of it for practice purpose, so that the remaining derivations you will understand better. Write it down. So are you done?
1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that's all for today's class. Next class, I will start with refraction, and those derivations are all I'll show you. So I have to send you these notes, right? I'll send it to you.
Sir,
Can you send the notes of magnetism and matter?
See, magnetism and matter I will share, but it is scattered. Can you guys look at my notes and then take it? My class lectures and then take it. So you have to collate and take, because it is a little bit scattered. This year I changed the information because of the deleted portions. Okay. So I will send two documents. I'll send two documents based on it. If you have any doubt, revisit the videos which have been uploaded. Just have a confirmation from there and make a note of it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if there are no doubts, we can wind up.